Hello, my name is Dr. Emily Morrow with Qualitative Social Analysis. Today we welcome back attorney Amy Bell, presenting part 2 of her presentation on unmasking parental alienation. Amy Bell of Ferriante & Bell is a family law attorney in Kansas and Missouri working with families in custody disputes and divorces. She is also a guardian ad litem for children in abuse cases.
Thank you, Emily. I just want to remind you that I am an attorney, but I'm not your attorney, and your case could have details that are specific and not covered in this presentation. This is not intended as legal advice. In part 2, we're going to look at how parental alienation works a little deeper. PAS happens through a combination of family dynamics. This is Richard Gardner's words. The mother's underlying psychodynamics, the father's underlying psychodynamics, and the child's underlying psychodynamics. We're going to get into the child's psychodynamics in part 3. This also is kind of where the 3 B's, bad mouthing, bashing, and brainwashing, are part of this. And the child is often considered a participant in the alienation as well as a victim. Watch out for these terms: programming, coaching, maneuvers, enmeshment, rejection, hysteria. Richard Warshak is one of the other experts that you will see that wrote on parental alienation. His book, Divorce Poison, expanded on Richard Gardner's ideas by examining the programming behaviors of the alienating parent. He described them as bad-mouthing, bashing, and brainwashing. Warshak's work does not deviate substantially from Richard Gardner's and relies on Gardner's work extensively in citations. In this presentation, we are looking at Gardner's words, but just know that if you see Warshak, they will be echoing these words. The number 1 dynamic, the maintenance of the primary psychological bond. In mothers, this is looked at as maternal instinct being really strong, and that mothers will do whatever it takes to keep their children with them, like a mama bear, except Gardner speaks of this as actually being animalistic behavior that isn't controlled by rational thought. They are almost literally a bear. Not kind of the way we like to think of a mama bear as just being, I'll fight for my kids, it being instinctual and not rational. In fathers, they also have a parental instinct they wish to protect, but it's not as strong as a mother's. And if the father has the primary psychological bond with the child, it is because of, quote, defective mothers. Gardner did not imagine that fathers were a primary psychological bond with a child without something being wrong with the mom. So fathers will alienate to protect children from their, quote, defective mother. The second dynamic is the fury of the scorned woman or man. Mothers become enraged with jealousy when their ex finds a new partner. Gardner assumes this is at least in part due to women having a very difficult time finding a new partner after a divorce. With fathers, he says, this is a direct quote, although it is probably true that women are more likely to be enraged following a marital abandonment than a man. This still does not preclude men reacting with intense anger when they are rejected. So it can happen to men, according to Gardner. Number 3 is an economic disparity. And keeping in mind, this economic disparity does still exist, but this book was written, Gardner's books were written in the late 70s, early 80s, and with some new additions into the 90s. So this element is possibly not as strong as it was 40 years ago, but it does still exist. Then this is that women are more economically vulnerable after divorce, adding to their fury. Mothers often cannot afford as robust legal representation as fathers, and PAS cases are very expensive. Fathers will use their superior economic position to buy their child's love. Fathers are more likely to afford staying locked in a long, complex custody battle, so they can keep these process going longer maybe than a mother wants to keep going with it. And you do see people priced out of custody battles that involve PAS. Number 4 is the reaction formation. So according to Gardner, mother's emotions are classified as reactionary and backwards. So hate for the father is actually love for the father that just has no outlet anymore because the father's not there for their love to go in the right direction. And in the same vein, love for the child isn't love, it's replacement for the love of the father. So emotions become reactionary, according to Gardner. It's really hard to kind of get around being framed this way because what you do isn't seen as the intent of what you're doing. It's a particularly frustrating one. Fathers can also have reactive emotions, and they might look similar to mothers in flipping the actual emotion, but he also notes that fathers can have sudden bursts of love towards children to make up for being relatively absent until that point, which the way he describes this is kind of similar to how people talk today about things like love bombing, which is usually associated with people who do have more abuse-coded relationship dynamics. Number 5 is projection. Mothers will invent scenarios in their own imagination. So Gardner thinks that sex abuse accusations are just projection, and that they represent a mother's own repressed sexual fantasies that they can't act out anymore because they don't have this romantic partner that they lost. And so they're imagining their child standing in for what role they play in the relationship. It's a pretty massive jump in logic, and one that you actually see women being treated as though this were true on occasion. Gardner believes men are less prone to projection, and this is a direct quote, "Perhaps this is a derivative of the biological differences between men and women, especially with regard to parental commitment." And he also goes on to say that when men use allegations of sex abuse, it's usually just a deliberate falsification. So women are victims of their own imagination and projection and don't mean to do it. And men actually do mean to do it. This is particularly challenging because if the women don't mean to do it, and this is something that they still need to rescue the child from, it's a very tough dynamic assumption to overcome to be able to get visitation with your child if they've made this assumption about you as a mother. Number 6 is exclusionary tactics. And according to Gardner, moms will start alienating their children from their fathers before the divorce or separation happens. They'll just be kind of priming them at the end stages of the marriage to look at their dad as being kind of the cause of problems in the relationship. Fathers, on the other hand, according to Gardner, do not generally start alienating behaviors prior to separation because they just aren't as involved with their kids pre-separation. And this is a through line with Gardner, that he consistently views fathers as not being active parents prior to getting divorced. And it can again come from the fact that he was writing 40 years ago, and there have been changes in attitudes on the role of fathers in a child's life, with millennial and younger parents kind of giving dads a more active role in the household. Probably Gen X. I mean, we all know that there were active fathers from the beginning, but there was this stereotype that dads just were not participants in raising their children 40 years ago that maybe isn't quite as strong today. Number 7 is overprotectiveness. Mothers have a number of overprotective tendencies, according to Gardner, including high anxiety and societal expectations that lead women to have just this hyper sense of what has to happen with their child. They're just a little bit more manic about how they get engaged with their child's upbringing. Fathers, they're just not as likely to be overprotective. And I think the stereotype about men and women does still exist. You see the YouTube videos of dads basically juggling 3 babies and, oh, dads are funny. It's not, again, it's such a derivative argument that you've just got these very rigid gender roles here that just aren't true in a lot of families. But this stereotype, I think, does still exist. And number 8, we have additional psychodynamic factors. So with mothers, these are largely just mental illness factors like anger, depression, and anxiety. And Gardner notes that those conditions are frequently exacerbated by the divorce process. And when you see those conditions exacerbated in the divorce process, they're often used by the opposing counsel to point at a woman and say, look at her, she's unhinged, she's crazy. So this anger, depression, and anxiety is exacerbated by the court process, and then that exacerbation is pointed at as her normal behavior, and that can be really challenging when that happens to women. Fathers have a whole additional set of additional factors that Gardner claims. Power, and this is a direct quote again, every man of wealth and power recognizes that there are a sea of women out there who view him as a primary turn-on. Gardner also thinks that father's new woman is more likely to be the source of alienating behavior because women are so insecure that they have to compete with one another. But he also notes that father's anger can increase in litigation. So again, keeping in mind, all of this is Gardner's words. He has a very rigid gender role, parenting role perspective on how families operate. But this is the underlying factors that are being applied when we're looking at parental alienation syndrome. So watch for part 3. We're going to come back and look at how a child uses methods to incite parental alienation.
Thank you, Amy. Please reach out with your story regarding parental alienation to info@qualitativesocialanalysis.com and our website www.qualitativesocialanalysis.com.